Adamu, a black African billionaire, lived a life that most people only dreamed of. From the outside, his world was perfect. His skyscraper office gleamed like polished glass in the heart of the bustling city, reflecting the sun and the endless ambitions within. The private jet parked on the runway was a symbol of his untouchable success, waiting to carry him anywhere in the world at a moment's notice. His social media pages overflowed with images of luxurious cars, exotic vacations, charity galas, and friends who seemed to orbit around him in admiration. From the outside, Adamu seemed unstoppable. Young entrepreneurs looked up to him, eager to follow in his footsteps. The media praised him as a visionary, the man who could turn any idea into gold. Investors queued outside his office, hoping to secure a piece of the empire he had meticulously built. He was wealth, power, and influence wrapped into one perfect image. But inside, behind the silk curtains of his penthouse apartment, reality told a different story. Adamu sat alone in the vast living room, a space so large that it swallowed sound. The silence pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. The laughter he shared in videos was rehearsed, the celebrations carefully staged. No one had seen him cry. No one had seen him falter. But he felt every ache, every weight of the life he had built at a cost he had never calculated. Family had distanced themselves, leaving only cold greetings during brief encounters. Friends, once companions, now seemed more interested in his bank balance than his company. Every conversation seemed transactional, every smile seemed strategic. The very wealth he had fought so hard to amass now created a wall between him and the world. He walked slowly through his apartment, glancing at the artifacts of his success. Trophies from conferences, plaques celebrating achievements, paintings worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. Each item, once a source of pride, now felt like a reminder of a hollow victory. Adamu thought of the deals he had made, the mergers, acquisitions, and contracts that had cemented his status. He remembered the countless nights spent negotiating, strategizing, and sacrificing personal moments for professional gain. And yet, all of it had not shielded him from loneliness, anxiety, and the gnawing question that he dared not voice aloud. Is this really living? Despite the admiration, he felt invisible. Despite the wealth, he felt empty. Despite the power, he felt powerless over the emptiness within his own heart. And yet, he had believed he was untouchable, that his empire could withstand anything, that his influence could shield him from pain or failure. But the world has a way of reminding even the strongest that nothing is permanent. The news came suddenly. A failed investment, buried under layers of complexity, spiraled out of control. Partners turned their backs. Creditors demanded immediate repayment. The media, always hungry for scandal, sensationalized every detail. Within days, Adamu's empire, the very symbol of his dominance, began to crumble. He watched it happen like a spectator, unable to intervene, powerless to stop the unraveling. His phone buzzed relentlessly with calls, messages, and emails, demands from lawyers, partners, and journalists. Friends who once toasted to his success now offered empty words of sympathy, while others avoided him entirely. For the first time in his life, Adamu felt what it was like to have nothing. The skyscrapers, the penthouse, the private jets, they could not save him. The wealth he had accumulated, the respect he had commanded, the power he had wielded, all of it was fragile. And in that crushing moment, he realized something terrifying. He had spent his life building a cage of gold, only to discover that the wealth meant nothing without meaning, love, and connection. Adamu sank into the leather chair in his empty office, the city lights outside offering no comfort. He thought of all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, and all the lonely victories. He had conquered the world, yet he had failed himself. For the first time, he understood the hardest truth of all. You can have everything in the world and still feel like you have nothing. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. The news hit like a thunderstorm. Adamu, the black African billionaire whose name had once commanded reverence, watched helplessly as everything he had built over decades began to unravel. It started subtly, a delayed report, a skeptical investor, but soon the collapse was impossible to ignore. Investors withdrew their support, citing instability and uncertainty. Banks froze accounts, leaving him with access only to what little cash remained. Media outlets, once his allies, turned their attention to sensational headlines. Empire in crisis, the rise and fall of Adamu Okoro, and Billionaire's blunder shakes market. The praise that had once flooded his social media vanished overnight, replaced by speculation, mockery, and gossip. Friends he had considered allies suddenly disappeared, leaving cold silence in their place. Invitations vanished. Texts went unanswered. Even employees he had trusted, the ones who had celebrated his victories and shared his late-night brainstorms, now looked at him with suspicion. Loyalty, he realized bitterly, was as fragile as glass. Adamu wandered through the marble halls of his office, the same halls where he had once walked with confidence and command. The trophies lining the shelves now felt like mockery, each plaque a reminder of past victories that could not shield him from present ruin. The expensive paintings that had once inspired admiration now stared blankly back at him, symbols of a life built on appearances rather than meaning. That night, in the vast emptiness of his penthouse, he gazed out at the city lights. Once they had felt like stars under his control, sparkling reminders of his power. Now they seemed distant and cold, indifferent to his suffering. The city pulsed below with life he could no longer influence. And in that moment, Adamu felt a fear he had never known, the fear of being utterly alone. His phone rang relentlessly, each call a reminder of the chaos he could no longer manage. Lawyers, creditors, reporters, all demanding attention, all threatening his reputation, all expecting him to fix what seemed impossible to repair. Offers to solve the problem came with strings so tight they felt like chains around his wrists, each one more suffocating than the last. He could trust no one, not his family, not his colleagues, not even himself in the whirlwind of mistakes that had led here. Adamu remembered the faces of his friends, once eager to toast his success at gala dinners, now turning away in shame, fear, or opportunism. The wealth he had thought would shield him had only magnified his isolation, revealing the hollowness beneath the glittering exterior. In the chaos, a quiet thought emerged, a thought he had buried under ambition, ego, and pride. Maybe this fall was exactly what he needed. He reflected on his life. The mergers, acquisitions, and deals that had built his empire had been impressive, yes, but they had come at a cost. Relationships had crumbled, moments had been missed, and his own heart had been ignored. He realized that he had never truly lived. He had chased power and wealth, mistaking them for meaning. Yet now, stripped of both, he saw clarity for the first time. The next morning, Adamu walked out of his office for the first time in years without the entourage he had relied on. No bodyguards, no drivers, no cameras, no assistants. Just him, stepping into the street like an ordinary man. He felt the sunlight on his face, the hum of the city beneath his feet, and for the first time, the weight of being a billionaire lifted. All that remained was a man, flawed, vulnerable, and human, facing his own choices, his own failures, and the stark truth about what really mattered in life. Adamu understood that he could rage, blame, and fight. He could point fingers at partners, investors, or even the system itself. But he also understood another path. He could learn, rebuild, and start over. And in that moment, amidst the ruins of his empire, a spark flickered within him. A spark he had long forgotten, hope. The hope that with humility, courage, and determination, he could create not just a fortune, but a life that mattered. Adamu, the black African billionaire who had lost everything, now walked a path he had never imagined, starting from the bottom. The skyscrapers that had once symbolized his power now felt like distant monuments to a life that had no meaning. The private jets, the luxury cars, the opulent penthouses, all gone in the eyes of public perception. He was no longer a figure admired from afar. He was just another man, learning to navigate the streets of a city that had once bowed to his name. At first, Pride burned like fire in his chest. How could he, a man who had once commanded empires, humble himself to learn from people he had once overlooked? The thought of being ordinary, of asking questions, of making mistakes in front of strangers, gnawed at him. Yet, necessity demanded humility, and survival demanded adaptation. One morning, wandering through a crowded street market, Adamu's attention was drawn to a small shop struggling to stay afloat. The owner, a black African woman named Nkechi, ran her tiny business with unwavering patience and energy. Every customer received her warm attention. Every expense was calculated. Every product carefully considered. She moved with quiet determination, carrying the weight of responsibility without complaint. Curiosity pulled Adamu closer. He asked questions cautiously, wanting to understand without imposing. Nkechi, noticing his interest, did not treat him differently because of who he had been. She saw a man willing to learn, and that willingness alone commanded her respect. Over the weeks, Adamu absorbed lessons that no university or boardroom could teach. Humility, the courage to listen, even when accustomed to commanding the room. Patience, understanding that progress is slow, steady, and cannot be rushed. Integrity, recognizing that trust and honesty weigh more than profits or status. Empathy, realizing that a business is about people, not numbers. He learned that success wasn't measured by how high you could climb, but by how much you could lift others along the way. Days turned into weeks. Adamu worked alongside Nkechi, managing clients, handling finances, and solving problems through creativity rather than authority. Each mistake was a lesson. Each small success, a victory far more meaningful than any boardroom win. He began to take pride not in wealth, but in understanding, in connection, and in contribution. The city that had once been his kingdom now ignored him, and yet he didn't care. For the first time he was free from expectation. For the first time, he was learning who he really was beneath the title of billionaire. And through it all, Nkechi challenged him in ways money never could. She asked questions that cut deeper than any business negotiation. Why did you build walls around your heart? Who are you when no one is watching? What will you leave behind if not love, trust, and respect? Adamu had no answers at first. The silence weighed heavily. But slowly, understanding began to take root. Losing everything had been a painful, necessary teacher, showing him that true legacy is built on character, not currency, on impact, not admiration. By the time he left Nkechi's shop that evening, the city skyline no longer seemed like a measure of his worth. The lights and towers that had once impressed him felt distant, almost irrelevant. For the first time in years, Adamu felt alive, grounded, ready to rebuild, not just his fortune but a life of purpose, meaning, and lasting impact. He realized that the richest man is not the one with gold or power, but the one who understands the value of patience, humility, and genuine connection. And in that quiet, crowded street market, Adamu began the slow, deliberate work of becoming that man. Adamu, the black African man who had once ruled empires, now understood that wealth alone meant nothing without vision, heart, and purpose. Months spent learning from Nkechi and immersing himself among ordinary people had changed him profoundly. The world of high finance, luxury, and power no longer defined him. He was ready to rebuild, not just a business empire, but a life rooted in integrity, empathy, and long-term impact. He began modestly. Using his remaining savings, he invested in a struggling local startup, an eco-friendly logistics company. The venture was far from glamorous, but it spoke to his new values. Unlike before, Adamu did not throw money at problems or seek instant recognition. He rolled up his sleeves, working closely with employees, asking questions, and listening more than directing. He encouraged feedback, celebrated small wins, and treated every team member as a partner rather than a subordinate. His approach was revolutionary. Word spread quickly that Adamu, the billionaire who had once been untouchable, was now accessible, humble, and hands-on. Investors noticed, not for the prestige of his name, but because of the tangible results and ethical management he demonstrated. Slowly, trust returned, and opportunities that had seemed lost forever began to reappear. Business growth, however, was only part of Adamu's transformation. He remembered the lessons from the ground, from seeing how ordinary people navigated hardship with courage, patience, and honesty. He launched mentorship programs for young entrepreneurs in neglected neighborhoods, offering guidance, resources, and inspiration. He funded workshops, provided access to business networks, and created platforms where ambition could meet opportunity. Each success story became a personal victory for him, a reminder that wealth has meaning only when it uplifts others. Alongside professional rebirth, Adamu focused on rebuilding his personal life. He reached out to estranged family members, humbly admitting past mistakes and asking forgiveness. He reconnected with old friends, not for appearances, but to truly nurture relationships that had been neglected in the pursuit of power. He spent time helping his community, listening to their struggles, and finding ways to support growth at the grassroots level. Loneliness, which had once haunted the marble halls of his penthouse, no longer had power over him. He discovered that connection, empathy, and shared purpose outweighed gold or influence. True success, he realized, was measured not in bank balances but in the lives touched and the trust earned. Challenges, of course, were inevitable. Competitors attempted sabotage. Former allies whispered doubts and jealousy, questioning why a man who had fallen so spectacularly dared to rise again. Investors tested his patience, employees challenged his leadership, and the media scrutinized every move. Yet Adamu had learned to face adversity not with arrogance or panic, but with humility, strategy, and quiet determination. He understood that every setback was an opportunity to refine his approach, strengthen relationships, and demonstrate resilience. By the end of the year, his small investment had grown into a flourishing enterprise, far exceeding expectations. But even more remarkable than financial success was the transformation in Adamu himself. Employees admired his integrity, competitors respected his tenacity, and colleagues began to seek his guidance, not for profit but for wisdom and character. Through it all, Nkechi remained a steady presence. Her quiet strength reminded him of the lessons that mattered, that wealth is temporary, power is fleeting, and legacy is built on impact. She had taught him that true success is a combination of heart, vision, and relentless effort, and her belief in him fueled every step of his journey. Adamu finally understood what had eluded him in his golden cage. Losing everything had been a blessing in disguise. Stripped of pride and forced to confront his own vulnerabilities, he had discovered his true values. Now he was not just a billionaire again, he was a man who could build something meaningful, lasting, and transformative. He had learned that life's greatest fortune is measured not by what you possess, but by the lives you elevate and the legacy you leave behind. Years had passed since Adamu, the black African man who once lost everything, began his journey from the ground up. His empire had grown, not through shortcuts, ruthless deals, or blind ambition, but through integrity, vision, and relentless perseverance. Yet this success carried a different weight. It was quieter, steadier, and far more powerful than the flash of wealth he had once chased. The buildings he now owned did more than glitter. They nurtured innovation hubs, vocational schools, and social enterprises. Funds that once fueled lavish parties and private indulgences were now reinvested into communities, helping people unlock opportunities they had never imagined. Adamu understood that the real measure of success lay not in gold or glass, but in the lives transformed by his efforts. Walking through one of his new centers for young entrepreneurs, Adamu observed students brainstorming, building prototypes, and sharing ideas. He saw himself in them, the same hunger, the same curiosity, the same refusal to settle for mediocrity. He realized with profound clarity that wealth had never been his true achievement. The real victory was the ripple effect of his influence, the empowerment of others, and the creation of legacies that could outlast him. Even his personal life had transformed. Relationships once fractured by pride and ambition had been mended through honesty and humility. Old friends now returned not for business, but for genuine connection. Family members who had distanced themselves during his fall now walked beside him with trust renewed. Adamu had learned to love deeply, to listen carefully, and to value authenticity above appearances. And through it all, Nkechi, the black African woman who had taught him humility, patience, and compassion, remained his anchor. She was no longer just a mentor in small business lessons. She was his partner in vision, his confidant in life, and his moral compass. Together, they cultivated programs that lifted communities, provided mentorship to struggling entrepreneurs, and created spaces where hope and creativity thrived. Through her unwavering support, Adamu realized that no one truly succeeds alone, and that shared purpose magnifies every achievement. The world had taken notice, but differently this time. Media outlets no longer glorified him for luxury cars, skyscrapers, or celebrity events. Instead, they celebrated the man who had rebuilt himself with integrity, who had turned failure into a blueprint for meaningful success. Former competitors approached him not with envy, but with respect and curiosity. Local communities hailed his initiatives as transformative, providing education, jobs, and mentorship that gave countless people a chance to rise. One quiet evening, standing on the balcony of his now peaceful home, Adamu reflected on the journey. Below him, the city lights shimmered, but they no longer symbolized control. They represented opportunity, hope, and the lives he had touched. He remembered the hollow laughter in his golden mansion, the panic and betrayal of his downfall, and the lessons he learned among ordinary people. Every failure, every heartbreak, every sleepless night had been a seed planted for something greater. Adamu had become more than a billionaire. He had become a man of wisdom, courage, and heart. He had discovered that the essence of true power lies not in what you amass, but in what you give. And for the first time he felt complete, not because of his fortune but because of his impact. Ending line, perfect for YouTube outro. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. The greatest wealth is not measured in currency, but in the lives you change, the character you build, and the legacy you leave behind. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video. Subscribe to this channel so you won't miss our next interesting story filled with love, lessons, and unforgettable moments. Until our next story,